Welcome to another episode of Azania In Therapy. I'm your host, Tlaka. Today I've got a special guest. Dr. Marinda Kotze is a research psychologist and the founder and executive director of Kaninzi Research Consulting. Prior to founding Kaninzi, Miranda worked as a M&E coordinator and later clinical researcher at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. She has over 10 years of experience as a researcher and evaluator and recently completed a PhD in psychology. Today, Miranda and I will be talking about her PhD research. In particular, we will delve into how the theories are used in psychological research and in practice, and how theories shape how we look at the social and behavioral world. Welcome, Dr. Kotze. How are you?
Hello, Thabang. It's awesome to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm all right after so many years. I mean, we met in university.
Yep.
Um, we shared a little
That's,
office. You know what I remember about the office?
yeah.
Um, you came in and you had these quotes. It was like this bare office, and you came
Oh,
in
yeah.
and you had all these quotes. I remember them. You put them on the walls, and then the office looked very nice. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember that. I do look back on it and think maybe it was a bit too colorful. Like there was a lot going on, but it was a very bare, almost a bit depressing looking office. So
Yeah.
I tried to boost the vibe a bit there. And yeah, we had some good times in that little office. Yes, that was like what, 2007, 8? No,
Oh yeah,
8.
many years ago.
Yeah, yes.
And a lot has happened since then. We've since studied, graduated, and you have then started a firm, a consulting firm. Maybe a little bit about Kaninzi. What do you do there? And what's the history of your consulting company?
So, I was, working for employers like you normally do, and but I felt like I wanted to challenge myself a bit more. I really enjoyed, doing research, and I felt like if I was working for an employer, I was doing sort of the same thing the whole time. It sort of felt like I was getting a bit bored, and I realized that research consulting is a bit more exciting in that sense that you need to think on your feet. It's new things the whole time. And so I took the plunge and yeah, started my own consulting business. And yeah, I mean, I've since then, I've worked as a subcontractor for other consulting firms and done some research projects on my own, mostly evaluation projects for NGOs and donor organizations, just like HIV prevention programs, evaluating those programs, and also some writing and editing projects here and there. So yeah, I'm definitely I don't look back. It was a good career move for me.
Wonderful. And for those who don't understand a little bit, because this is, as I mentioned earlier in our chat, it's a psychoeducational channel. Do you get questions about what a research psychologist does, where you are, or well, you're not in South Africa, but do people often understand what is it that you do?
Yeah, I mean, when I say I'm a research psychologist, people don't know what I'm talking about.
Mm.
Like, what is that? That sounds very technical. Okay, let's not ask more questions. Um, so yeah, I don't think it's not such a commonly known field as clinical psychology, of course, would be. I don't know if you want me to maybe talk a little bit about how you become a research psychologist,
Yes,
or
yes,
what
yes.
kind of work you do.
So that we may get some recruits. There are
Yeah,
people who
maybe
don't
we
know
get
that this
some.
is where they need to go.
Yes, yes. I remember when we were recruited, when we were in honors and the lecturers come and they recruit you, then they always make a big fuss about research is actually that's where all the really smart people actually go. They say
Mm.
stuff like that. Uh, but anyway, yeah. So if you want to become a research psychologist, then you have to go study psychology, just like everybody else. I think these days it's a BA own choice, but then you take all the psychology modules and the research modules. Then you must do honors in psychology. and then you must do a master's in research psychology. It must be a master's with a coursework component. So it shouldn't just be an academic master's. It should be a professional research psychology degree. You write a mini dissertation as part of it. Like with all the master's degrees, you've got to be selected for it. And there's a whole week-long process where they select usually about 6 persons per program. I think the competition for research psychology is not so strict as it is for clinical. So, your chances of getting in is a bit higher, but still, they want to choose people that they know would actually make it and pass. So yeah, then you do the coursework. The coursework is usually a lot of basically quantitative research psychology, quantitative research methods, qualitative research methods, some statistics. You learn to do interviews. You also learn a lot of theory. And other applications, maybe a little bit of monitoring and evaluation, maybe it depends on some universities have different applications depending on who their lecturers are. But anyway, and then after that, you have to go and do an internship at a registered organization for a year where you're supervised, where you do basically all the things a researcher is supposed to do. And then you write a board exam, HPCSA board exam. And if you pass that, then you are a certified research psychologist. So it's quite a long journey. It's at least like 6-7 years of your life.
Well, a worthwhile journey. I mean, that's what I learned in university. When you go to university and you make a comment, they'll say, "Did you research that?" And then all of a sudden, you have to learn this whole new way of understanding the world, right? And
Yeah.
before we actually talk about your PhD and what you studied about theories, just a little bit about where you are now. Where are you? When did you arrive? How do you find it there? Before we go into your wonderful topic.
Right. So I've been living in Tbilisi, Georgia for the last 4 going on 5 years. Georgia, as in the country Georgia, not the state in the United
Not the
States.
USA, because that's what I thought.
Yes, yeah, that's what a lot of people think. So this is Georgia, the country. It's in Eastern Europe. It borders on Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, and the Black Sea. It's a very small country, but yeah, it's a very lovely, beautiful country. I enjoy it.
Somebody, end up in Georgia, like in the weather, the food, the people, like how do you find yourself there, and what stood out for you about Georgia?
Well, yeah, we moved there because we thought it was it's a safe country. It's had a lower cost of living. Yeah, it's great for if you want to work remotely because they have good internet that's also relatively cheap. So it's easy to live here as an expat, and yeah, there's a lot of expats here as well. So it's a nice community. Yeah, it's not a country a lot of people know of, but it's becoming more popular as it's a more of an up and coming country, I should say. And
You
yeah,
like the
I
food?
really enjoy it. The food is
You don't miss
okay.
cook sisters and wors?
Yeah, we have a South African butcher now, so there
Ah, do
is
you?
biltong and vors. Yep, those things are now here.
Okay.
But yeah, they have a lot of pastries. They like wine and cheese. So if you like those things, you will really like Georgia.
You'll feel at home. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, doctor, you did a wonderful PhD. I think it's a very interesting topic, and so you researched about theories. Maybe a little bit more about your research topic and how come you chose that.
So yeah, so my topic, it sounds like a mouthful, so I'm going to try and break it down. Basically, I studied the use of theory in the academic literature, and specifically the HIV academic literature. So I wanted to see how were theories used to better understand the HIV, the social and behavioral aspects of HIV in South Africa. So I did a systematic literature search from the 1980s, from 1982 to 2020. And I went and looked at those articles, specifically articles that had to be based on South African research, South African population, and it had to be about the social and behavioral aspects of HIV. Then I went and looked in those articles to see what do they use theory? How do they refer to those theories? Are they referring to those theories explicitly, as in directly saying what it is that they used? Social cognitive theory, or did they use it more implicitly? You can, as you read the article, you get an idea of they were sort of influenced by something, but they don't say it exactly, or they didn't use theory at all. So I looked at that, and then I collected some other information about each article, and then analyzed that data to see how explicitly theory is mentioned in the literature, and then also what theories were used, and grouping those theories together into paradigms, how those paradigms change over time, or if there is any change over time. And I did a bit of a meta-theoretical analysis then of the most common paradigms. So why do a study like that? So I, when I was doing research, as a research consultant, and even when I was still working at an employer, it piqued my interest how theory was used and how it was referred to by my colleagues and my clients. So, I mean, like as a practitioner, you would know, that there's this bit of a clash between practice and theory. And when I would speak to some people, they would say, some people would be almost militant about it and say, they don't even care about mainstream theory. It's just in the way. It doesn't speak to our day-to-day experiences as clinicians or even as researchers. But what we see on the ground is just not reflected in the theory, so we don't even use it. Other people said, well, I know these theories. I went to university, I studied these things, but I don't know how to put it in practice. I don't quite know what am I supposed to do in the clinical setting or when I'm doing my research, when I'm developing the intervention. How am I supposed to use that theory? So that piqued my interest, just, those kinds of reflections. I also, when I was looking at intervention programs and evaluating them, you would see that there's sometimes no programmatic theory underneath those interventions, or there is, but it's not really well stated, or the programs are more influenced by public opinion or, opinion about, trends. It's more like, well, we think this will work. It looks nice. It sounds good. It's not really based on an actual well-developed theory. And so that got me reading on what research on theory use and how our theory is used. And at the same time, what also became clear to me was that, we live in a very data-driven world. Data. It's a key word. Everything. It's a big word. We hear it all the time. Big data, data-driven analytics. And, even when we talk about psychology and about how to strengthen psychology and improve psychology, we often talk about how can we improve methods and data. And we rarely talk about theory and what can we do on the theory front. So I feel like it's sort of a missed or lesser turned to discussion. And the thing is, I mean, obviously improving methods and using more sophisticated data analytic tools is obviously great. And I can obviously understand why that would be, a good idea in improving the field. But more data it improves our knowledge if we collect more information, but it doesn't enhance our understanding. Right. So we sit with more knowledge, but not necessarily with more understanding. Theory helps us to piece together that information and make sense of it, and it links us to the broader research program, a broader understanding of what we're doing. So that's also why I thought it should be an interesting study to look at how theories are used, and specifically in the HIV field. I feel like there's been a lot of research in that field, but I feel like we sort of have gotten a little bit stuck, at least in the behavioral and social aspect. Like we try all kinds of interventions and they're not really working that much. Maybe we should go and take a moment to step back and look at the theories that we're using, and also the assumptions that underlie those theories, because I think that's also important, that we sort of become a bit more skeptical of what are we using, because our theories are, the windows through which we look at the world and interpret our data. So it's incredibly important to to be cognizant of the theories we use and to be skeptical of them.
Yeah, I mean, you are pointing towards, I mean, the idea that so we're in this society, data is big, and but there's a way in which you look at the data. How do we understand it? You're thinking about theory, and you're seeing some people are quite militant about it. Somehow it's implicit, but it's a thing that we need to do. I like the idea. You say it's a window. When you say theory, I think of a net, like somebody goes fishing and then they have this net, they throw it in to sort of, it'll capture a certain kind of fish, but it excludes others, but it's a way of capturing something. If you don't have it, what how do you explain all the data? And so what did you find?
Well, okay, so basically, in a nutshell, what I found was that out of all the articles that were on the social and behavioral aspects of HIV, about half of them did not mention theory at all, did not seem to be using it at all. The other half that used it, about 20% of them used theory implicitly and sort of vaguely. Yeah, and then the other, as far as the paradigms are concerned, what came out clear was that social behaviorism was the most commonly used paradigm, especially in the beginning. But then, so through the 80s and 90s, social behaviorism was the predominant paradigm. But then towards the 2000s, especially towards the 2010s, critical theory started to make inroads into the literature. You started to see a lot more critical theory, and then also the socio-ecological and systems paradigm theories that look at the world from a multi-level perspective. They started to make inroads in the literature, and they've almost become almost now the more predominant theory or paradigm. Social behaviorism is still there, but it's now had to make space for critical theory and socio-ecological theory. And you can also see, behavioral economics is also making, it was still small. I mean, my literature review ended in 2020, but even if you look around at the literature in general, behavioral science is definitely making a major inroads into the literature. Those things like nudging and, behavioral economics theory is making a massive inroads at the moment. So that's, if I could say, that's the trends over time. And then I made some other observations as well about how theories were used, but yeah, we can talk about that.
Summoned by greater and lesser pleasures, a man decides daily between dirt and treasure. The visionless ones only stand to fall, but brave are they that heed the call, fight. Persistently superior, lesser loves whisper, but safe are they that recognize danger. Victorious is the man who learns to master fire, so learn, dear sir, learn to stand for truth in fire.
Yes, my thought was the way you are describing it, right? So when you started your study in the 1980s, I think it's like time is passing, but as time passes, there are different theories that are being used. Well, what do you think about that different people at different times use different theories? Is it because people learn from a different group, or people are just born in a certain context? What do you think about time and the predominance of certain theories at that particular time?
Yeah, I find that very interesting because I like to, it's interesting to look at how scientific ideas develop over time.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is. Technically, from the 1980s to 2020 is not even that long, really. It is long, but it's not, in terms of development of ideas, it's not even really that long. But anyway, so social behaviorism was, and still continues to be, a very popular paradigm. I think social behaviorism, of course, is an umbrella term for various theories like social cognitive theory by Bandura and health belief model and a theory of planned behavior and so on. They all sort of understand the world as being or behavior is as a product of interaction between cognitive factors, behavioral factors, and the environment. And the thing is, those theories are very useful, not only in just understanding behavior, but also in predicting behavior. And they were particularly popular in the 1980s. They kind of developed from the 1960s onwards. And when HIV was, here around the late 80s, early 90s, social scientists started to, come together and say, well, we need to understand how we're going to how we're going to make sense of the behavioral aspects of HIV. And so there was a workshop where they specifically had mostly theorists or people who represent theories in the social behaviorist realm. So Albert Bandura was there. There was someone who represented health belief model and so on. And I think that workshop played a big role in sort of guiding the research program for HIV into a more social behaviorist direction. And health behavior in general, I mean, even if you pick up a health psychology book today, you'll see social behaviorist theory is deeply represented in those in the study of health behavior. But what was interesting, and I saw this in my literature as well, was that there was also a lot of critique against social behaviorism, especially maybe towards the end of the 80s and the 90s. So people were saying that, social behaviorist theories, or psychological theories, as they were sometimes just because they were just seen as synonymous with psychology, they focus too much on the individual. They focus too much on individual agency. They sort of they might neglect or underappreciate the value of contextual factors.
Yes.
They overemphasize, individual agency, and maybe underestimate the influence or the extent to which individuals might not always have agency or control of their situation. And people also started to say, well, we need to be more mindful of cultural factors. These theories there were concerns that these theories are made or developed from a Western perspective, and maybe they are not always applicable in the African context, where a lot of the research is not being done. And so this critique developed, and that then encouraged, well, if you look at the literature, usually what would happen is they would critique social behaviorist theory, and then they would say, well, we need something else. We need to turn into a different direction. And then typically what happened is researchers would either turn to interpretive methods, like social constructionism rather, or to critical theories, feminist theories, Freire's critical pedagogy, things like that. And so then that's where you start seeing a bit of changes happening, that social behaviorism is still used, sometimes in combination with those theories, but they've added a different, the critical or interpretive component has been added. So it was as a result of critique. I would though say that some of the critique was perhaps not quite warranted. It was maybe a little bit based on an oversimplified understanding of social behaviorism. Because social behaviorism, so what would often happen is people would say, social behaviorism only assumes that knowledge leads to, if you improve knowledge, you can change attitudes and then you can change behavior. But in reality, you as a therapist would know that it's not a causal line. Just because someone knows what they should do doesn't mean they're going to do it. If lots of people know they shouldn't be smoking, but they're smoking, right? And so, but the thing is, social behaviorist theory does not actually state that in its most oversimplified manner. It says that, but it also encompasses a lot more complexity, that there's feedback loops, that there is more, that the context plays a role and so on. But anyway, so people critique social behaviorism, maybe unfairly in some cases, maybe not unfairly in other cases. But yeah, that led to the rise of critical theory and interpretive theory, and then also socio-ecological models. Especially more recently, you see that quite a lot. They call it sort of the systems turn. Now we're moving away from the individual to the individual in context, and we're moving away from individual health factors to public health factors, public health outcomes, and we're moving away from psychological internal variables to more structural external variables.
Yeah.
So that's the trend that I'm certainly seeing.
I mean, excuse, I mean that's interesting for me because as you started explaining there, I thought about, because you're explaining, how it moves from social behaviorism to it gets criticized, more systems, ecological, then it moves there. What I was thinking about was, how are there theories that sort of, they go through time, they outlast or they survive, how the resilient ones, how does for example, it sounds like, social behaviorism, um it's a bit resilient, right? And then I was asking myself, how is it? Because of the meeting that you described, that Bandura and company, and the people set, and so that helped it? Or is it that as a society we just then develop theories on top of the other one, like it's a natural progression? Because I'm wondering if the critical approach, if that would be there if we didn't have the social part.
Well, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, I think, well, critical theory is ultimately, it's a critique of mainstream theory. So it exists because the mainstream exists. Well,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if critical theorists would like that definition, but it is technically how they came to be. So yeah, no, that's a very good observation. I think social behaviorism has been so resilient because I think it's a theory that it covers both the understanding and explaining behavior part and the predicting and changing behavior part, because that's specifically in health psychology, like in HIV research and even in other like sports science and so on. We want to intervene as well. We want to change behavior. And a lot of theories are good at describing behavior. Like you get certain social constructionist models and things or descriptions of behavior that's very interesting and enlightening, but it doesn't help you necessarily to change behavior.
Yeah.
So I think it's been so resilient because it has been able to do both of those things. And
Yeah.
I think it's sort of, I want to say, common sense in a way. The way it's designed, it's not completely abstract and difficult to understand. The way it's written up, all the theoretical, the original source material, it's fairly easy to comprehend. Bandura, of course, has done a lot of work. I mean, he had a very, very long life, and he worked tirelessly to promote social cognitive theory. He applied it to HIV. He applied it to all kinds of other fields. So he did a lot of the labor to show us how that theory should be used. Whereas some other theories, I think they're designed and then they're just kind of left as is. The only person who ever uses them is the one that designed them, and it's never really further cultivated. So I think that's also probably a factor that plays into it. And yeah, I think there should be a synergy between theory, research, and practice, right? If you think about a triangle, there should be arrows between those three things. They should be in conversation with one another the whole time. And healthy scientific disciplines have nice synergy between those three things. You develop theory, but you don't do it in isolation. Research is necessary, constant refining and testing. Practical observations also inform the development of a theory, or at least the first ideas around a theory. Same with practice. It cannot live in isolation of theory and research. It needs to be informed by evidence-based practices and theory. And research also, it needs practical observations and theory to guide it. And so ideally there should be that conversation between those three things. And if that happens, your theories are they can be the good things that they should be. They can help to describe, explain, and predict behavior, and link the research in the field to the broader research program of the topic. But when there isn't that synergy, when research, theory, and practice start to live in isolation with one another, they're in their own silos, that's when the problems start to come in. Then stagnation starts to occur, because now theory is developing in its own direction and practice is doing its own thing. And that's where we see that gap often between research and practice, because now the connections between theory, research, and practice is either non-existent, or it's very thin or one-dimensional. And so that hurts the field. I think, just to answer your question about social behaviorism, I think the research there has been very coordinated in terms of it's been fed with research and practice the whole time, to help develop that theory and to demonstrate its relevance. It's also been tested often, whereas other theories have not necessarily been tested as often.
Yeah, I think that's a useful response, because I often, wonder how certain, I like ideas, why certain ideas sort of perpetuate themselves and others not. And this link that you're describing between then research, practice, and theory, and the constant feedback and development, I think it makes sense. And I think things also last because if it's practical, and you say it's common, like if we use it and it works, then we usually follow up. I don't know if you've also observed how technology then affects how we think about theory. Did any of that come up in your research, just in terms of um, time, right? Because I'm imagining there are particular ways of researching, understanding, theorizing, but with time we might develop more. And with technology, did you see any relationship there, or not really?
Not really in my own research. I think, look, my study was from the 1980s, but the number of publications were relatively low in the 80s and even in the 90s, and it only really started to pick up in the 2000s. So I can't really, make any statements about that. But I have seen and I've heard, interesting things about, people. I don't know if it's really, but how, to what extent it's already being done, but the use of AI in helping us to understand how different constructs maybe influence one another, so to test theories or to even develop new theories with the use of AI. So that's an interesting future, technological development that I'm interested in seeing more of.
Yeah. No, I'm also interested in that, And did you have any surprises? What surprised you in terms of your research? Something unexpected that you came across?
I think what was interesting. Well, it's interesting for me. I don't know if it will
Or
be
something you weren't
interesting,
expecting
but I
at all
wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Well, the paradigm shifts, I think, was quite a neat observation, because I was wondering, because I think if we look at the world right now, we can see that there is a bit of a paradigm shift maybe occurring, or there is some conflict between ideas. And so it was nice to see that actually in the literature as well. So it's not just me that think this. I can actually see in the articles the shift occurring, and gradual as it is, but there's definitely a shift in the way people view social variables and how they do their research. But yeah, my main concern is, as I'm reading all these articles, is that, we need to remain skeptical of the theories that we use. And I'm concerned sometimes, like you were saying earlier about the net, you use a theory sort of as a net. You just scoop it in and you see what you get out. Ultimately, you only have a net, and it has big holes in it, so it's always going to miss certain fishes. So, and in the same way, theory can also, if it's not used well, it can actually hinder knowledge production instead of promoting it or improving it. So, like I was saying with the isolation, if they are in isolation and theory is not being enriched with data and observations, it becomes thin and irrelevant, and irrelevant for practical purposes or for research purposes. And also, we could potentially become victim of confirmation bias, of course. Like theory, you could see it as like a window, but those windows with the very thick glass that have little like grooves in them. So when you can look through the window, but it distorts the image a little bit. Some things will look a bit fatter, and other things will look a bit thinner, and some things will look a bit blurry. And if you are cognizant of the fact that you're looking through this window with its imperfections, you at least know that, okay, what I'm seeing might not be one-to-one exactly what's out there. But if you're not cognizant and skeptical and aware of what you're using and the lenses through which you use the world, you might end up, assuming that what you believe is also what you are seeing, and then become a victim to confirmation bias, where you always see what you want to see and you never see what you don't want to see. That's not quite in line with your theory or your ideological predilections. And I see a lot of that. So that's something that I'm concerned about.
I see. I like that you bring out the concern, and in a way, a warning of some sort, that as we try and understand things, we need to bear in mind that we might be missing something. So I like also the metaphor you're using with the window, and it's blurry. You're seeing something, but also be aware that it might not be exactly like that. I think of the difference between a map and the territory. You've got this map that kind of gives you an idea, but when you get there, it's not, often when you use GPS, it tells you that the road looks in a particular way. And once you get on the road, you're like, oh my, the potholes.
Yeah.
So it's a way of understanding, but I think with a pinch of salt. So I liked it. So now, maybe then connected to this idea of what you're concerned about, after you were done, did you start having other questions? Did it make you want to study further or ask a bit more, or curious about something since getting your findings and completing your PhD?
Studying theory is a never-ending pursuit. So there's still so much more to read and understand, and I think where there's definitely a need is maybe it's also like recommendations based on my research, is that researchers and practitioners should endeavor to remain they should endeavor to always learn about the theories that they're using, not assume that they already know. Because if you don't think you need to learn anything, then you won't learn anything new, right? You will just assume that you know everything. And I think it's important for us to remain skeptical of the theories that we use, and especially the assumptions that underlie them. Doesn't mean we need to be critical and deconstruct and throw it away, but we need to know what the strengths are of the theories that we use, but also where the limitations are. Some theories are great for certain purposes, but they might really not be for another. But that comes from really understanding the theory. So continuous professional education is certainly one way. And I think also just developing sort of a keen mindset to explore the philosophical assumptions underneath theories, and so where does this come from? What is the big idea behind this theory? What does it really imply? What does it say about the world? and about how knowledge is produced, so to think a little bit deeper about it, and to develop a bit of a deeper bookshelf, maybe, in the sense that you should not only just read the stuff that you agree with, but to sometimes also read some things, from perspectives that you might not always agree with, because that's how you learn. And at least then you can, because I think, when we criticize other belief systems or theories, sometimes that's done with only a half understanding of that thing, because we already know we don't like that, so we just avoid it, instead of saying, well, maybe we should really go and find out what does this thing say? What is it about, really? Then you can at least better criticize it, or you can develop a more nuanced understanding of the issue, and realize, okay, there's some things about what I'm believing that might not be quite true, but there's some merit in what that guy is saying. So you develop a bit of a deeper understanding. So you're not, because as a researcher, you really shouldn't be locked into one ideological position. You really should be able to be skeptical and let go of something if it's no longer serving you, if it's not valid, if it's no longer an accurate theory. And then in terms of theory, it needs to be tested more, and if it's being used, it needs to be used explicitly, named and described properly, not in vague terms. That kind of thing.
Yes, the practical part for me there, because now you took it from the theory, but now you've got like some clear suggestions, right? Also consider ideas that don't necessarily agree with yours. The fact that we need to keep learning a bit more, questioning a bit more, and so that I think that's useful. The other thing that we underestimate is, once you've answered questions, done your research and thought about things, it also puts you in spaces like, or do people, places you've met since doing your research that you wouldn't have otherwise thought you'd be in. Was there any development like that as you were studying? You went to places or you met people who, outside of that pursuit of this question, you wouldn't have otherwise met?
I think, in terms of because the study is quite it's not just in one field almost. It's in psychology, but it also speaks to philosophy to some extent, philosophy of science. It's also a bit in the health sciences as well. So, for example, my examiners were three completely different people. Like the one person was an epidemiologist, the other one was he was in nursing, but he was a expert in critical realism, which was my theoretical point of departure. And the other examiner was a psychologist. And it was interesting when answering their questions, and also subsequently when talking about my research with other people. Whenever they look at the research from their perspective. So I did this study, and I have my ideas about what I think is interesting. But whenever I meet somebody and I tell them about my research, you can see that they are looking at it through their own perspective as an epidemiologist, or as a philosopher, or an interventionist, or a practitioner, or whatever. And so it's interesting that different perspectives you get, because it is such a broad scope. But it's also quite tricky as a student to sort of field all these different answers, because I also only look at it from one angle, and it's also tricky to you cannot predict what people are going to ask you, what people are going to take away from it. But it's always interesting to share your research with other people. Always learn something.
Before my last question, so what did you learn about yourself in this journey? Because I imagine there must have been a lot of learning.
Oh yeah. No, Al. In the beginning, I was very ambitious. I'm doing this, and I made sure I choose a research topic that is really comprehensive, and that it will certainly produce novel insight, because that's what they say to you, right? If you're going to do a PhD, it has to be novel, right? So I took that a bit further than you should. because my study was quite large in scope, and I think it overwhelmed me. So I don't know if it's, I don't know if you should follow my example, but learn from my mistakes. It worked out well in the end, but yeah, it was overwhelming, but I was really interested in it, and I really wanted to do it, and I liked the fact that I did the whole study myself. I conceptualized the whole thing myself, did the whole thing myself. It wasn't, it wasn't a study that I inherited from somebody else. I feel like that, gives you confidence as well. That I came up with this whole thing and I did it all myself, and I was able to do it. I pulled through. It's a hell of a confidence booster, I must say that. You feel like once you've done this, you can go and do any kind of thing now. So yeah, it's definitely a confidence booster, and yeah, it's like you it kind of confirms that, okay, I can do this. I am able to do research, and I really enjoy it. It was also very enjoyable. I really it reconfirmed to me that I really enjoy doing research, doing a lot of reading and writing. That's my thing. That's totally my thing.
Which sounds like it has been a worthwhile exercise. People just said the comrades here. You sound like some of those people, they're like, I did this, and it was so difficult, but I pushed on through. I made it. Now I can trust myself. I think I can do life. So maybe lastly, then, what does the future hold? So you've done your research now. You're looking at researching a bit more, conferences or other projects that you're interested in.
So yeah, I've kind of switched back to research consulting now, but I'm also writing up my results for publication, and I would like to work on this project more, perhaps delving more into the theories themselves, and also maybe looking more at ways of how to apply theories, like, because I think that clearly there is a gap in terms of understanding how to use a theory practically for either research or practical purposes. So I'm not quite sure what that project will look like, but it's an idea that I have. Maybe it becomes a book or something. I don't know. So, but yeah, so I definitely want to continue with this study further.
Thank you very much, Miranda. I mean, it's been lovely. Good to see you. Good to hear from you. Lovely to see what you've gone and done, and all the best for the future.
Thank you very much, Thabang. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. And yeah, it's been an honor to be here, and it's great to see you again.